Hello everybody, welcome to another video, and today is the 18th of February. Today I'm going to be making a pretty short video just covering some relatively minor frontline updates from the city of Bakhmut and its environs, which is really now something that I'm just doing every day. But before we get into that, I want to talk about the fact that there was a pretty interesting post by the advisor to the mayor of Mariupol, and this is from the Ukrainian side actually. So this guy is called Peter Andriushchenko. So he claimed that there was an 80-kilometer convoy of trucks and of busloads of Wagner troops that were heading towards the Zaporozhye and Vuhledar fronts. And so they were coming from the road that starts in Mariupol and then connects to Berdyansk. So that would be right around here. I think there's a local road that leads to Berdyansk that is along the coast. If not, then he would be referring to the one that connects through Manhush and Usipenko to Berdyansk. Either way, 50 bus loads, that means like 30 men in each bus. That could be like 1,500 men or maybe more if they're tightly packed in. That could be upwards of 2,000 men that will be sent to reinforce the Zaporozhye and Vuhledar fronts. Now, this is interesting because it would indicate a shift in Russian tactics in these two fronts, because in most of these areas, we are seeing really the Russian regular army conducting the assaults. Like, for instance, in Vuhledar, you have the 155th Separate Marine Brigade over here, and they've really been one of the units conducting these assaults. Also, like, you have the 40th Naval Infantry Brigade and some other Russian regular units like the 36th Separate Guards Motor Rifle Brigade. So sending in the Wagner mercenaries that would be conducting these frontal assaults with small detachments that would be able to overwhelm the Ukrainian lines. Maybe that is something that we'll see in the future, because it had more success relative to the Russian attempts at success in Vuhledar. So maybe there is some sort of change going on behind the scenes in regards to Russia's battle tactics in certain parts of the front line, but really that is up to speculation, and I don't want to spend too much time on a rumor that we just posted on one advisor's Telegram channel. But just so everybody knows, those are the rumors. Now, if we're going to the situation in Bakhmut, around Ivanivske, we received reports of Russia trying to renew their assaults towards the T-0504 highway, where they were pushed back from pretty recently by the Ukrainians. So here we have a video that was geolocated to the area adjacent to the Donetsk water canal, and it shows a T-64 on the Ukrainian side, and it's engaging Russian infantry, and it's doing this alone just as it's fighting and trying to prevent the Wagner, probably the first echelon, from further advancing. And that's how I know that the front line is at the specific area, which does mean that I was able to shift the front line a little bit to the north, because originally I had it look more like this, but that is really just like pretty pedantic. Every single like square meter of land, like, it doesn't really matter in this grand scheme of things, but it does mean that the front line is a bit closer to the T-0504 road. In terms of Ivanivske, though, the town is still holding, and I have nothing new to report from there. I do have something new to report, though, from the forests just to the south of the more rural parts of Bakhmut on the western outskirts of the city. So this forest, it was sort of serving as a buffer in between the Russian lines and the Ukrainian defenses. And really, for weeks, I was anticipating a Russian advance into the forest, but that never really happened. Now it has. The southern part of the forest has been taken by the Russians, and they're actively trying to flank the Ukrainian groupings in some of these agricultural enterprises, some of these dachas, some of these allotments over here. So they're trying to cross through the forest where they may not be noticed in time before they're able to break through. And then they're also advancing from the south, where there are battles going on at the moment. So this could be an issue, because if these fortifications are taken over, then it would disrupt the connectiveness between the Ukrainian groupings in Ivanivske and the ones in western Bakhmut in this case. And so you do have some fortifications over here that I've talked about ad nauseum in previous videos. Like, you see all of these agricultural fields, all of these different warehouses, and all of these different facilities that have been converted into trenches, into mounds that could be used by the Ukrainian military as fortifications to slow down the Russians. And so all of those Russia needs to take over if they want to disrupt the connectivity. Also, you have a bunch of these different parking lots where you may have some sort of Ukrainian grouping as well. And then you also have the residential areas, and just know that this entire residential area, it is pretty packed with trees. But again, as I said before, a lot of these are deciduous, and so their leaves shed once a year. Either way, it's not like the leaves are going to give them cover, but they may be able to conceal themselves better in like a small arms fire combat situation. Either way, the Russians have also made gains further to the south of the Mariupolske cemetery. They've not entered it yet. You do have some Ukrainian forces in this general area, but the Russians were able to take over some of the nearby fields that are surrounding the warehouse complex that they took over recently. So this is just strengthening their positions to the south of the cemetery and to the all of the residential blocks, which they may enter in the future, depending on the circumstances. Now, around Opitny, the Russians were able to advance past the line that I had drawn previously, which is around here, and they were able to take over Mali Troitsky Lane and reach Radnyansky Provoluk Road. And so that's the front line at the moment. So the advances are very gradual. It is really just residential areas in this place where the fighting is going on. It's really just house-to-house combat at this point. The Ukrainians have really dug in. They are really fighting tooth and nail for every single house, for every single road. You have concrete fortifications. You have all these different squadrons that are fighting house to house. It's making it very difficult to advance, but that's why you have the Wagner group that is conducting most of the dirty work in this area, advancing through the Ukrainian lines towards the Damba, which is a dam in Bakhmut, which is already, the perimeter of it has already been taken by the Russians to the east, but to the west, the Ukrainians still have control over the perimeter. Not that it matters that much, but it would just strengthen Russia's flanks to the south of Bakhmut as they're conducting further attacks to the east of Bakhmut in the Bakhmutka district and around the industrial district. And in the Bakhmutka district, there are rumors of Ukraine conducting counterattacks, but really there isn't any sort of proof of this just yet, any sort of corroboration, even by mainstream Ukrainian sources, so I can't speak much of that. What I could say, though, is that the Russians were able to cross over these ponds that have been really the main dividing line between the Russian groupings in the industrial district and the Ukrainian defenders just to the west. So the Russians were able to take over the art winery, which is a liquor store. They were able to take over some judo class building. They were able to take over a convenience store. They were able to take over some of the residential houses, some of the apartment buildings. I think they're about 4 stories when you look on Google Earth. So they're not that high up, but still they could be pretty good areas to launch some sort of anti-tank missile from, or just use small arms fire or sniper, or just for spotting enemy forces as they advance through narrow roads. And that is just the nature of urban fighting. So in that regard, every single house counts, especially the ones that are higher up compared to some of the residential buildings that Ukraine controls over here. And also what this means is that the Ukrainian groupings in these schools and in this post office are basically encircled, or not encircled yet, but enveloped on 3 sides, because they're being attacked from Vatutnia Lane, and they're being attacked from the east, and they're being attacked from the north. So we'll see what happens over there, but you do have some pretty large structures in this cauldron, you could say. This is a very small cauldron, but again, every single piece of land counts in this regard, as Ukraine conducts a protracted defense. And once this specific part of Bakhmut would fall, then it would open the way to the 2 main roads leading across the Bakhmutovka River to the western part of Bakhmut. So that is the wider significance of this area. This is one of the more dense and more highly populated parts of Bakhmut, and it is closer to the city center. So that's why it is important. But then again, if you look at Western Bakhmut, the structures in here are much larger. You have some industrial facilities, some hotels, some apartments. You have some pretty large barracks for different brigades, like the 54th Mechanized Brigade. And so in terms of just overrunning those positions head on, that's very difficult, which is why we're seeing much more activity going on the flanks right now. So on the flanks, the Russians were able to secure some of the open fields and some of the valleys that are connected to the Bakhmutovka River. And so they were able to make gains approaching the Stupka District. The Stupka District is the northernmost district of Bakhmut, I would say. In terms of size, this is roughly its perimeter. And so the Russians have began advancing pretty deep into the district, taking over some roads, and now they're applying pressure to an auto parts store, to some warehouse, and to the local train station. According to the Deep State map, which is a pro-Ukrainian map, the Russians are actually very close to Yahidne, and the only way this would be possible is if they took over some additional blocks of the Stupka district, and also that they took over some of the open fields south of Berkivka. I don't know if that's true. I personally don't want to change the map to that because there's no proof of it, so I'm keeping it the way that I had it originally. But if that was true, then it would imply that the Russians are already assaulting Yahidne, and that would be a big issue for the Ukrainians in this area, because Yahidne, after that, there's really nothing much in between the Russians and Hromove, which is the town that is used by the Russians, or the Ukrainians, to supply their grouping in Bakhmut. Also, if Yahidne would be taken, then whatever Ukrainian forces are still in the Stupka district would basically be enveloped on three sides, and so they'd also have to retreat from the northern parts of Bakhmut. And so it would just be very difficult for Ukraine. Additionally, it would be difficult for the Ukrainian forces in Berkivka, the ones that had just retreated from Krasnohora and then from Paraskivka. They would have been on the run really for about a month and a half, just continually retreating, so they would be exhausted, and many of them would be rendered combat ineffective for a certain period of time if they weren't killed or captured by the Russians, so that's another issue. Speaking of Berkivka, though, the Russians did conduct some assaults on the town. They did not take it, but they were able to gain control of some small plots of land to the north. They are already pushing through some of the forested areas into the northern part of the town. So we'll see if they're able to take it in the coming days, because most of the Russian pressure over the past week or so has been in the northern part of Bakhmut as they continue to capitalize on their gains. So we'll have to see if anything amounts from that. But that is really it in terms of the front line. We did receive some reports from DPR sources, so again, take it with a grain of salt because it is from the DPR. What they're saying is that all of Ukraine's higher ups, all of their command has retreated from Bakhmut as they continue to send reinforcements to the city. And I could believe this in theory, because the situation around Bakhmut is getting pretty desperate in terms of the encirclement that I've been talking about now for the past few weeks. And so you don't want to have your higher ups, your people who are organizing the entire army and all of the military structure, being caught in the middle of that. So if it was true that they're retreating, then it would show that the Ukrainians are acknowledging the severity of the situation, and they are trying to take precautions in order to avoid any sort of wider repercussions. And that would be the smart thing to do. You don't want to keep all of your higher ups concentrated in an area where there could be some serious damage. It could also indicate what's to come in the future in terms of withdrawals. But for now, it seems like the Ukrainians are continuing to put up resistance. And as I said, they're sending even more reinforcements to the combat zone. So, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys in another video.